What happens when a carefully orchestrated media appearance turns into an explosive confrontation no one saw coming? What happens when royal composure meets journalistic integrity and neither side is willing to back down? The result is a television moment, so shocking, it ended with security being called and a guest being escorted off set. This is the story of how Meghan Markle's appearance on CBS this morning became one of the most talked about interviews in television history, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened here. Trust me, you'll want to hear every single word of this unbelievable encounter. The morning started like any other at the CBS studios in New York. The production team had been preparing for weeks for this high-profile interview. Meghan Markle was scheduled to appear on CBS this morning to discuss her latest charitable initiatives and upcoming projects. It was supposed to be a friendly promotional interview, the kind that morning television thrives on. Soft questions, heartwarming stories, and plenty of opportunities for the guests to shine. Nate Burleson, the former NFL player turned television host, had done his homework. He had prepared a list of questions that would allow Meghan to discuss her work while avoiding any controversial topics. The producers had made it clear this was meant to be a positive segment, one that would highlight Meghan's philanthropic efforts and give her a platform to connect with the American audience. But from the moment Meghan walked onto the set, something felt different. There was a tension in the air the cameras couldn't quite capture. She took her seat across from Nate with a smile that seemed just a little too practiced, a little too controlled. Her team had provided a list of approved topics, and everyone involved knew the boundaries that weren't supposed to be crossed. "Good morning, Meghan," Nate began, his trademark warm smile lighting up his face. "Thank you so much for joining us today. I know our viewers are excited to hear about the incredible work you've been doing." "Good morning, Nate," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that familiar measured tone that had become her trademark in media appearances. "Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to talk about the causes that are close to my heart." The interview began smoothly enough. Nate asked about her recent visit to a local food bank, and Meghan launched into a well-rehearsed response about the importance of community service and giving back. She spoke about the volunteers she had met and the families they were helping, painting a picture of compassion and dedication that played perfectly for the morning television audience. "It's so important that we remember," Meghan said, leaning forward slightly, "that behind every statistic, there's a human story. There's a family that's struggling, a child who might not know where their next meal is coming from. When we can connect on that human level, that's when real change happens." Nate nodded along, asking follow-up questions about her foundation's work and future plans. Everything was going according to script. The producers in the control room were pleased. The segment was running smoothly, and it looked like they would have exactly the kind of positive, uplifting content they had hoped for. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the way Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment. Or perhaps it was something in Nate's expression that suggested he had more on his mind than the approved questions. Whatever it was, the carefully controlled atmosphere began to crack. "I have to say," Nate continued, his tone still friendly, but with a subtle edge that hadn't been there before, "it's refreshing to see you focusing on these grassroots efforts. Some people have questioned whether celebrity involvement in charity work is always as authentic as it appears to be." Meghan's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry. What do you mean by that?" "Well," Nate said, maintaining his professional demeanor but clearly steering into uncharted territory, "there's sometimes a perception that when individuals get involved in charitable work, it can become more about the publicity than the actual cause. I'm not saying that's the case with you, but how do you respond to critics who might question the motives behind celebrity charity work?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. This wasn't on the approved list. The producers were probably reaching for their phones, ready to intervene, but it was too late. The question had been asked, and Meghan's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. "I think," she said, her voice taking on a cooler tone, "that question reveals more about the person asking it than about the work itself. When someone's first instinct is to question the authenticity of charitable efforts rather than celebrate the positive impact, it says something about their perspective." Nate didn't back down. "I'm not questioning your specific efforts, Meghan. I'm asking a broader question about celebrity culture and charity work. It's a conversation that many people are having, and I think our viewers deserve to hear your thoughts on it." "Our viewers," Meghan repeated, emphasizing the word in a way that made it clear she didn't appreciate being included in that group, "deserve to hear about the real work being done to help real people. They don't need manufactured controversy designed to create headlines." The tension was building now, and both host and guest seemed to realize they were moving into dangerous territory, but neither was willing to retreat. Nate, with his journalistic instincts kicking in, sensed a story far more interesting than the planned puff piece. Meghan, feeling ambushed by questions she hadn't prepared for, was clearly struggling to maintain her composure while pushing back against what she perceived as an attack. "I'm not trying to create controversy," Nate said, his voice remaining steady. I'm trying to have an honest conversation. Isn't that what good journalism is supposed to do? Good journalism, Meghan replied, her smile now completely gone, involves asking questions that serve the public interest, not fishing for sound bites that can be taken out of context and used to create drama where none exists. The interview was spiraling away from its intended purpose, and everyone in the studio could feel it. What had started as a routine promotional appearance was turning into something far more confrontational, and neither participant seemed willing to step back from the precipice they were approaching. The studio atmosphere had become electric with tension. Cameras continued rolling as both Meghan and Nate seemed to forget they were on live television, each determined to make their point. What happened next would go down as one of the most uncomfortable moments in morning television history. Nate leaned back in his chair, clearly not intimidated by Meghan's pushback. I think our viewers are smart enough to distinguish between legitimate journalism and sensationalism. When I ask about the authenticity of celebrity charity work, I'm asking because it's a conversation happening in communities across America. People want to know if the celebrities they see on television truly care about the causes they promote, or if it's just another form of brand management. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked like genuine anger. Brand management. Are you seriously suggesting that my work with food insecurity, with women's shelters, with educational programs, is some kind of calculated marketing strategy? I'm not suggesting anything, Nate replied, his journalistic training evident in how he maintained his composure while pressing forward. I'm asking you directly, how do you respond to people who might view celebrity charity work with skepticism? I can't respond, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly, by pointing out that while we're sitting here debating motivations, there are actual people being helped by actual programs. The families I met yesterday at the food bank don't care about my so-called brand. They care about the meals their children are getting. And that's admirable, Nate said, nodding. But you have to understand that when someone has the platform and resources that you have, people are going to scrutinize how that platform is used. It's not personal, it's just the reality of public life. Meghan's laugh was sharp and humorless. It's not personal. Nothing about public life is more personal than having your motives questioned every time you try to do something positive. Do you think I need the publicity? Do you think I need the platform? I could stay home and live quietly, but I choose to use whatever influence I have to help others. But that choice comes with scrutiny, Nate pressed. And I think it's fair to ask whether the scrutiny ever influences the choices themselves. Whether the knowledge that charitable work generates positive press coverage factors into the decision-making process. The question hit something deep, and Meghan's carefully maintained media training began to crack. You know what factors into my decision-making process, she said. The fact that I grew up understanding what it meant to struggle. The fact that I know what it's like to feel powerless. The fact that when you have the ability to help others, you have a responsibility to do so. I respect that, Nate said, but his tone suggested he wasn't finished. But you also have to acknowledge that your current platform, your current resources, your current ability to help others, all of that comes from your association with the royal family. How do you separate your charitable work from the privilege? That position provided. The studio fell silent, except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Meghan stared at Nate for a long moment, and everyone watching could see her calculating. Her response, when she finally spoke, came ice cold. Are you seriously going to sit there and suggest that any good I might do in the world is somehow invalidated because of my personal relationships? Are you going to reduce every charitable effort, every attempt to make a positive impact? To gossip about my marriage? I'm not reducing anything, Nate replied, clearly aware that he had struck a nerve, but unwilling to back down. I'm asking legitimate questions about how privilege and platform intersect with charitable work. These are conversations that happen in academic circles, in policy discussions, in communities across the country. Academic circles, Meghan repeated mockingly. Policy discussions. Let me tell you what's not academic or theoretical. The woman I met yesterday who hasn't had a full meal in 3 days because she's making sure her kids eat first. The teenager aging out of the foster care system with nowhere to go. The immigrant family too afraid to access services because they're worried about their status. These aren't abstract concepts for me. And I'm not suggesting they are, Nate said, his voice remaining steady despite the increasing hostility across from him. But I am suggesting that when someone with your profile talks about these issues, the conversation inevitably becomes about you just as much as it becomes about the issues themselves. How do you navigate that reality? Meghan's composure finally snapped completely. How do I navigate it? I navigate it by trying to focus on the work while people like you insist on making it about everything except the work. I navigate it by answering the same cynical questions over and over again, while the actual problems I'm trying to address get lost in the noise. But don't you think, Nate continued, seemingly oblivious to how angry Meghan had become, that addressing those questions directly is part of the responsibility that comes with having a platform? Don't you think transparency about your motivations and methods actually serves the causes you care about? Transparency, Meghan said, her voice now clearly audible to everyone in the studio. You want transparency? Here's some transparency. For you, I didn't have to come on this show. I didn't have to subject myself to these kinds of questions. I could have stayed home, kept my mouth shut, and avoided having my every move dissected by people who have never done a fraction of the work they're so eager to criticize. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. This was live television, and their carefully planned segment had turned into something completely unpredictable. But the train wreck was so compelling that no one wanted to cut away. Nate, perhaps sensing that he had pushed too far, but unable to resist going just a little further, asked the question that would ultimately end the interview. So why did you come on the show, Meghan? If these questions are so unreasonable, if this scrutiny is so unfair, why subject yourself to it? Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You know what, Nate? That's a great question. Why did I come on this show? Why did I think that, maybe, just maybe, I could have a conversation about important issues without having to defend my right to care about them? I'm not questioning your right to care, Nate said, also standing now, clearly realizing the interview was spiraling completely out of control. I'm asking legitimate journalistic questions. Legitimate journalistic questions, Meghan repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Is that what we're calling this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like the same tired playbook of trying to tear down anyone who tries to do something positive. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. The carefully orchestrated world of morning television had given way to raw, unfiltered conflict, and neither participant seemed capable of finding a way back to civility. The studio had become a battlefield of words, and what happened next shocked everyone present. Standing face to face. Now, both Meghan and Nate had abandoned any pretense of a civilized morning interview. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would become television history. You want to know what the real problem is here, Meghan said. Her voice carried across the studio with unmistakable fury. The real problem is that people like you can't stand the idea that someone might actually care about something other than themselves. You're so cynical, so convinced that everyone has an ulterior motive that you can't recognize genuine compassion when it's standing right in front of you. Nate, clearly taken aback by the intensity of her response, but still holding his ground, shook his head. That's not cynicism, Meghan, that's journalism. That's asking the hard questions that need to be asked. If you can't handle having your work scrutinized, then maybe you're not ready for the platform you're trying to use. The words hung in the air like a slap. Meghan's face shifted through a range of expressions: shock, hurt, then pure rage, all in the span of a few seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. Not ready for the platform. Let me tell you something about being ready, Nate. I was ready when I walked away from everything I knew to marry into a family that never wanted me. I was ready when I endured years of racist attacks in the British press. I was ready when I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. And I'm certainly ready to handle questions from someone who thinks gotcha journalism passes for meaningful conversation. This isn't gotcha journalism, Nate protested, but Meghan was no longer listening. You know what it is, she continued, her voice rising again. It's the same pattern I've seen over and over. Anytime I try to do something positive, anytime I try to use whatever influence I have to help others, there's always someone like you ready to tear it down, ready to question my motives, ready to suggest that I'm somehow not worthy of the platform I have. That's not what I'm doing, Nate said, but his words were drowned out. Yes, it is exactly what you're doing, she shouted, pointing directly at him. You invite me on your show under the pretense of discussing charitable work, and then you spend the entire time trying to undermine everything I'm trying to accomplish. You want to know about transparency? Here's some transparency. This is exactly why people with resources and platforms sometimes choose not to get involved, because there's always someone waiting to tear them down for trying. The producers in the control room were in complete panic mode. This was live television. They couldn't cut away without making the situation even more newsworthy, but they also couldn't let it continue indefinitely. Phone calls were being made, executives consulted, and security quietly alerted. Nate, perhaps realizing the situation had spiraled far beyond what he intended, tried to regain control. Meghan, I think we both need to take a step back here. This conversation has gotten more heated than either of us intended. Oh, now you want to step back, Meghan said, laughing bitterly. Now that you've gotten your dramatic television moment, now you want to be reasonable. You got exactly what you wanted, didn't you? You turned what was supposed to be a conversation about helping people into a circus. That was never my intention, Nate said, and for the first time, his professional composure began to crack. I was asking legitimate questions that I thought our viewers deserved to hear addressed. Your viewers, Meghan repeated, shaking her head in disgust. Let me tell you what your viewers deserve. They deserve better than watching someone's charitable work get torn apart for entertainment. They deserve better than seeing important causes reduced to gossip and speculation. At this point, a producer appeared at the edge of the set, trying to get someone's attention to wrap this segment, but both Meghan and Nate were too focused on their confrontation to notice. You know what the most frustrating part of all this is? Meghan continued, her anger now mixed with what sounded like genuine hurt. I came here in good faith. I thought we could have a real conversation about real issues that affect real people. Instead, you turned it into an interrogation about my personal life and my motivations. I asked you about the intersection of celebrity and charity work, Nate said, his frustration finally showing. These are important questions that deserve to be explored. Explored. Meghan's voice rose with disbelief. You didn't explore anything. You attacked. You questioned my authenticity. You questioned my motivations. You questioned my right to care about the causes I support. That's not exploration, that's character assassination. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Camera operators looked nervously toward their directors. Audio technicians checked their levels. Everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years. Nate made one last attempt to recover the situation. Meghan, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. My questions weren't meant as personal attacks, they were intended to generate meaningful dialogue about important issues. Meaningful dialogue. Meghan's voice was now filled with contempt. There's nothing meaningful about what just happened here. What happened here was a perfect example of why people with good intentions sometimes choose to stay silent. Because there's always someone ready to twist their efforts into something ugly. At that moment, security personnel appeared at the edge of the set. The producers had finally made the decision to contain the situation. Meghan noticed them immediately, and her expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like relief. Perfect, she said, gesturing toward the guards. The perfect ending to this disaster. You got your dramatic television moment, Nate. I hope it was worth it. She began removing her microphone with sharp, angry movements. I came here to talk about helping people, she said loud enough for the entire studio to hear. Instead, I got ambushed by someone more interested in creating controversy than covering the actual work being done to address real problems. Meghan, please. Nate tried, but she was already walking away from the set. No, she called back over her shoulder. I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this network. And I'm done with journalists who think tearing people down passes for doing their job. The security team escorted her toward the exit, not because she was being forcibly removed, but because the situation had become so volatile that everyone involved needed protection from the fallout. As she walked away, Meghan turned back. Final time. You want a story? Nate, here's your story. Someone tried to do something good in the world, and you turned it into a spectacle. Congratulations. I hope your ratings were worth it. And with that, she was gone, leaving behind a stunned studio, a bewildered host, and a moment of television history. Nate stood alone on the set, visibly shaken, as the cameras finally stopped rolling. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media. The interview had become the kind of viral moment that morning television both craves and fears, but it had come at a cost no one expected. What began as a routine promotional appearance turned into one of the most dramatic confrontations in TV history. Two people with starkly different views on journalism, celebrity, and responsibility clashed in the most public way imaginable. And the result was a moment that would be dissected and debated for years to come. So, what do you think really happened here? Was Nate justified in asking tough questions, or did he cross the line? Was Meghan's reaction understandable, or did she overreact to legitimate journalism? Let me know in the comments below.